Hi, everybody. Let's get started. Welcome to the 13th Annual National Postdoc Appreciation Week. I'm Tom Kimbus. I'm Executive Director and CEO of the National Postdoctoral Association. I'm coming to you from Maryland, just outside of the nation's capital. We at the NPAW are thrilled to have you with us, and we join in your celebration. Congratulations to all of you for everything you do inside and outside of your work. If you may not know, but the NPAW actually founded NPAW to provide greater recognition for postdocs. And this year's NPAW theme is Finding Your Balance. This continues our core 2022 programming theme, one of the important ones here at the NPAW, of advancing mental health and wellness. And before we turn to today's great lineup of speakers, some important points for you from the NPAW. One, first, remember, it is NPAW. It's a week. So it's going to last much more than today. Visit the NPAW Hub. It's been dropped in the chat. It's on the NPAW website to see the full calendar of events that take place across the country. They're both local events, as well as more than 50 that you can join virtually, even if you're located at a different institution. And this type of cross-institutional learning is just something that's remarkable. So we strongly encourage you to sign up for any of these using the links in your chat. Second, during NPAW in the last couple of years, we've conducted and kicked off our annual NPAW Postdoc Needs Assessment. We have another critical one for you to do this year. It's hard to understate the importance of our receiving a strong response from you in the postdoctoral community. The survey allows us to understand how we can serve you best. Completing the survey makes you eligible to win an Amazon gift card, which doesn't hurt. The link is in the chat, and all of us appreciate your taking less than 10 minutes to complete it, but it's very important information. It helps us prioritize our efforts as we move forward into 2023, so we can give back to you in the ways that are most meaningful. So please complete the survey after today's session and make sure to share it with your peers as well. I'm also proud to share two exciting announcements on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or DEIB front. Advancing DEIB in the postdoctoral community is core to the NPA's strategic plan, and it's one of our core values. First, the NPAW Impact Fellowship Program, which you may have heard of. We're heading into our second year. It's designed to increase access to opportunities for marginalized early career research trainees to build skills, understand their strengths, and develop their networks. So as Amy will show on the screen, I'm thrilled to announce the members of the NPAW Impact Fellows class for 2022-2023. There we are. Oops. So we have here Camila Duarte Cordon from Columbia University. Congratulations. Dr. Phyllis Mensah from Utah State University. Dr. Caleb Weifong from WashU in St. Louis. Dr. Catherine Sanchez from the University of New Mexico. Dr. Lisa Veras from Rutgers University. And Dr. Ricardo Velasco Trujillo from the University of Minnesota at Twin Cities. We congratulate all of these 6 fellows. It's an incredibly difficult and competitive process. There are more than 50 highly qualified applications received for just these 6 seats. So as these fellows go throughout their journey of the next year, we'll be sharing their news and their progress as they develop their programs back at their host institutions and developing their own professional careers. It's something that we do each year. Again, it's just in our second year, but we encourage you to follow along what happens with our Impact Fellows. Also, very excited. All right, there we go. We stop and then we go. Sometimes it's like that. We have the pleasure to announce our first NPAW Racial and Ethnicity Equity Summit, which is taking place on November 17th this year from 1 to 4 Eastern. And this follows up on last year's highly successful Gender Equity Summit. So this fall, instead of gender, we're going to be exploring issues that impact the greater postdoctoral community from the lens of race and ethnicity. We have an incredible lineup of 20 diverse voices from across the nation, speaking on 4 different panels across the continuum of the postdoctoral journey, from graduate school all the way through the postdoctoral period, and then entering into the permanent workplace, and what race and ethnicity issues may impact each one of those different components. The event is completely free to anybody if you're part of the NPA or not, and registration begins today. So see the link in the chat there to register, and please make sure to spread the word to your colleagues and peers about these important conversations. Lastly, we thank our generous sponsors of NPAW, Gallagher Insurance and Protein Tech, both of whom have been the lead sponsors on NPAW for 3 years in a row. And now I'm excited that we have with us today Dr. Sharon Milgram, Director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education at the NIH. And Dr. Milgram is a tireless champion for both postdocs and for wellness issues. We at the NPA as a team thank her for all that she does, and also specifically for presenting earlier this year a very special version of her famous Becoming a Resilient Scientist course. This was specifically focused on postdocs. And if you missed any of it, we have it recorded, and those sessions are available on the NPA's webinar archives. I really encourage you to review those if you weren't able to attend them live late spring of this year. So with Dr. Milgram, I'll turn it over to you for some words of wisdom to kick off NPAW for this year.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone who works at the NPA, all of the volunteers who make the organization work spread across campuses all around, and to each and every postdoc who is a member. Let me just start by saying my thoughts are with all of you who have roots in the island of Puerto Rico and whose family and friends are struggling right now. And you know, this is just one of many, many hard things our community has faced over the last few years. And I think that holding activities like this one, where we talk about finding balance and finding the space for our humanity, is so important. So I am really honored to be here. I always look at my calendar on my way out the door on Friday, and I look at what's coming up and I put it in the back of my mind. And so I saw that it was the kickoff for National Postdoc Appreciation Week, and we were going to be talking about balance. And I couldn't help but notice, I ride an e-bike. I'm still getting used to it. It's heavy. Sometimes I hit mud, and sometimes I hit stones, and sometimes people come out and sort of surprise me. I couldn't help but notice how many times I sort of lost my balance a little bit. And then I was on the tennis courts on Saturday morning playing, and I said, I always lose my balance when I do those corner shots. And the person I was playing with said, it's because you don't work on your core strength enough. And those two things made me sort of reflect on the theme of this week and appreciate there's sort of 3 things. And they're not about balance. They're actually about imbalance. Because let's be honest, we move through life not really worried about balance. When we feel in balance, we feel joy and happiness and satisfaction. What we really are is worried all the time about the imbalance in our life, whether that's imbalance on the tennis court or imbalance that we're working in labs so much that we don't attend the workshops we want to work on, or imbalance that we really want to get away, but we're feeling guilty about it. And so I think there's 3 things. How do we prepare for imbalance? How do we right ourselves in the moment? And what happens when we lose our balance? And if you think about it, that leads to something that's really at the heart of the NPA, first and foremost, is education and community. We learn how to deal with imbalance by embracing lifelong learning, and postdocs, I mean, you exemplify lifelong learning. Whether that be learning about new careers, learning about new techniques, learning how to mentor and manage. I mean, you exemplify lifelong learning. Community is exemplified by everything that the NPA does and everything that all of you do on your campuses. Imbalance is dealt with by finding grace for ourselves, but also grace for others. So, a lot of times I'm just hard on myself. You're hard on yourselves. We're hard on ourselves as a community, right? People are hard on us and we sort of hear it and take it on. And something so important is for us to find some grace in how many hard things that we have dealt with, in how wonderful but challenging these careers are, right? In the fact that culture change takes a long time. So we feel like what we're doing is a small step and we lose sight of the fact that it's part of much bigger number of steps. Another thing that I think is important that we keep in mind as we grapple this week with balance and as we talk about ways to find balance, and that is to appreciate the concept of stress-induced growth. That we are all growing and learning by exploring topics like this. The future of science, the future of healthcare, the future of education, the future of science policy, the future of teaching, of entrepreneurship, of moving through the hard things we are moving through is in this room and in all the activities across the country and across the globe this week. We owe you a debt of gratitude. We owe you some balance in what we do for you and how we think about your training. I don't think we say thank you enough. I don't think that we pause enough to celebrate successes. So that's another really important thing that we will do this week. I can't stress enough how much better the landscape is for postdocs since the National Postdoc Association came on board. I remember lots of discussions about postdoc education before the NPA existed. It is such a different conversation since the NPA has sort of induced a little imbalance into the system by saying, think about these things. And so I guess I hope you will embrace imbalance as a part of getting where you want to go. I hope you will support yourself and others through the imbalance. To do well, we have to be well, is something I like to say a lot. But also to treat others well, we have to be well ourselves. So all of the important things we want to do rely on balance, or more maybe how we deal with imbalance. So thank you all for coming today. It's really such an important conversation, and this is such an important community. So from the acting NIH director, from all of us at NIH who think about the community, we thank you, congratulate you, appreciate you, and hope to do the best we can by you. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks so much, Dr. Milgram, for those remarks on balance and imbalance, and for all that you do for the postdoctoral community and have been doing for so long. It's a very deep and insightful way to kickstart NPAW, so thank you. We'll now dive into our panel for today on finding your balance, which our speakers will discuss the challenges that early career researchers face, share some tips that they've learned from their struggles, as well as provide a framework for postdocs to build better balance in their professional lives, especially as they navigate their next career steps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for today's panel, Dr. Anna Womack, a friend of the NPA and the Director of Wellness from the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs at Columbia University. Thank you, Anna, and to our three panelists, whom you'll introduce, and to all of you, happy NPAW.
All right, thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, Dr. Milgram, for your comments as well. I think it's important things to reflect on, and particularly appreciate what you had to say about allowing grace for ourselves and for others. It makes me think of compassion, which I think we could all stand to practice a little bit of for ourselves and for others. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. So as you know, we have three panelists. We have Dr. Yen-Ting Tai, Dr. Robbie HOB-LEE, and Dr. Inga Hansen. Dr. Tai is going to start our presentation for today. And just to tell you a little bit about her background, Dr. Tai is from Malaysia, where she completed her bachelor's and master's degree in the sciences. After completing these educational pursuits, she moved to Japan to complete her PhD in biology. Now, Dr. Tai is a third-year postdoc at Penn State Health in Hershey, Pennsylvania, studying human neurodevelopment, specifically how particular risk genes contribute to neurodegenerative diseases. She's also a member of the Postdoc Council with the NPA. I'll turn it over to Dr. Tai to tell us a little bit about her background and story.
All right, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Just to make sure, did everyone see my slide? Okay. Okay, so thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to share my story as an international postdoc in the US and some of the challenges that I encounter. So the theme for NPAW this year is finding your balance. So as we all know, a postdoc is a stressful job, and we encounter so many challenges daily. So finding your balance is definitely important for us. So I did my bachelor and master in science in my home country, Malaysia. After that, I moved to Japan for my PhD in biology. Currently, I'm a third-year postdoc at Penn State Health Hershey. As an international postdoc, I personally face many challenges. Moving from country to country, the biggest issue I encountered was the cultural difference. When I first moved to Japan for graduate school, I had to learn a brand new language while getting used to the change of weather and lifestyle. In Japan, the working culture is quite different than Malaysia. Japan has one of the world's most extended working hours, and Japanese society emphasizes the hierarchical relationship between a senior and a junior. Most of the time, I felt obligated to stay in the lab until very late because my assistant professor was still working. Even now, I find it hard to adapt to this culture. During my PhD, I had a chance to do an internship at the University of California, Davis. So I realized people in the US appreciate work-life balance, and the working culture here is less formal. My lab mates always invited me to play volleyball with them after work, and even the PI encouraged me to take vacation. They always find time to do things that they enjoy to relieve stress. So I realized I prefer the lifestyle in the US. So that's why I decided to move here for my postdoc. Shifting from Eastern culture to Western culture is not easy. I think one of the biggest challenges faced by international postdoc would be the language. I think I'm pretty fluent in English, but still I'm having difficulty in communicating efficiently due to my accent. Also, I grew up learning British English, so when I moved here, it was difficult to get used to American colloquial and everyday language. Other than that, pleasantries are a critical aspect of Eastern societies. You must be careful in conveying your opinions so that it does not seem overly aggressive and ends up offending someone. You have to be able to read between the lines because what people say often does not reflect what they think or feel. Being indirect is seen as being polite and respectful in Eastern culture. While on the other hand, people in Western countries prefer being frank and outspoken. Speaking bluntly and being honest is not a sign of disrespect. You are expected to point out mistakes immediately when you notice them and to accept feedback with good graces and not as personal attacks. So when I first came here, I was shocked by how my PI spoke, especially during meetings. Postdocs from Eastern countries might find this way of communicating uncomfortable and take it personally. The inability to communicate well creates unnecessary stress and affects the mentor-mentee relationship. So if you are having issues communicating with your mentor, I think it's helpful to have private meeting with them. Tell your mentor about your feelings and find a communication method that works for both of you. Overall, being a postdoc is a job requiring much dedication. Because of our commitment to work, we often are isolated from close friends and family. Many postdocs find themselves far away from home, profoundly stressed and lonely with no clue where to go for help. So some people end up developing depression and anxiety. So remember to talk with people around you and never be afraid to seek professional help. Sometimes you need other people to know that you are not okay. Eating right, getting enough sleep, exercising, and making time for self-care are essential to maintaining physical and mental health. Time management is critical to maintain a work-life balance. For me, I always plan my experiments ahead. This way, I can multitask and perform multiple experiments simultaneously. For example, I work in the cell culture room while PCR is running, or work on the reports during incubation steps. However, try not to put too many activities on your agenda. For example, you plan to leave the lab by 5:30 p.m. Then you have to be realistic about your approaches. Given your available time, how much do you think you can accomplish? Keep in mind that it's very easy to overestimate how much you can do. So stay conservative about this. No matter how busy I am, I always find time to do things I like and limit myself to stop working after 10 p.m. I will also try not to go to the lab on Saturday or Sunday. I will either hang out with friends or stay at home to bake, paint, or do anything that can calm my mind. When I find myself in a very stressful condition, I will take a short break and travel somewhere else to stay away from my workplace. Besides that, it's stressful for us to juggle our family life and career, especially for postdoc with kids. It's not uncommon for us to have to work on weekends, holidays, wedding anniversaries, or your kid's birthday. Personally, there was a time when I had to tell my parents that I could not go back to my hometown to celebrate Chinese New Year with them because I had to work. My parents couldn't understand why can't I pause the experiment and why sometimes I have to work in weird hours. When I was doing my PhD, I worked in the lab from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. I'm lucky that my husband is a scientist too, so he understands my working schedule. His working time is relatively short and flexible, so he took care most of the housework. Still, I always find time for him. Every day, I went home to eat dinner with him before getting back to work. Also, I went on trips with him and our friends during holidays. Now, although both of us are doing postdoc in the US, I'm working in Pennsylvania while he is in California. So this is even more challenging. Regardless of our busy schedule and time difference, we video call every day and always travel across the country to visit each other. In general, I think it's essential to talk with your family so that they can understand your working hours. Communicate with your partner so that you guys can work together to take care of the family. The most important thing is never neglect the feelings of your partner, your family, and your kids. The last thing I want to discuss is that postdocs have been identified as positions with little job security, poor compensation, and an unclear path to a permanent post. Sometimes junior scientists are treated as cheap labor rather than as participants in a well-rounded training program. Although postdocs drive academic research in many institutions and are the future of academic research, the challenges we face due to fierce competition and low job security are often left unaddressed. The number of faculty positions isn't just enough to accommodate all of us. On top of that, the pressure to publish is tremendous. We are left to either publish or perish. Postdocs must compete with each other in terms of the number of publications to secure a position. With the pandemic and inflation, this situation has become worse. A survey conducted by Nature on postdocs worldwide showed that pandemic has negatively affected their career prospects. The pandemic has reduced the output of academic labs globally, slashed institutional budgets, and threatened the availability of grants and fellowship. Sadly, as we all know, postdocs are underpaid, although we have high educational backgrounds. With the economic situation now, many postdocs are struggling with such low pay, and some postdocs are even losing their jobs. Unfortunately, so far there is no effective solution for this issue. For years, NPA has been working to make incremental changes for improving the lives of postdocs. For example, NPA continues to advocate for higher postdoc pay. However, more work still needs to be done. In conclusion, as postdoc, work-life balance is a thing we have heard of, most of us want it, and few of us have. To me, I love my job, but at the same time, I don't want it to be the only thing in my life. The bottom line is that we need to create time by doing more. Get organized, do something you like, talk with people you love, and take a break when needed. With this, I will end my talk today. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Tai, thank you so much for those helpful insights. I love your take-home messages. Get organized, talk to the people that you love, take care of yourself, do things you enjoy, and all of these things can be helpful steps in our ultimate goal of finding the balance. Thank you also for highlighting some of the cultural differences that can impact folks as they try to navigate finding the balance. So appreciate that. I also want to note that we will have the opportunity for some Q&A at the end of each of our panelists' presentations. So if you have some questions, you can feel free to enter them into the chat as we go through, and we'll try to keep track of that. Or if you want to wait until the end, there will be opportunity to ask specific panelist questions or broader questions to the whole group. So, all right, thank you so much again, Dr. Tai. So for our next presenter, we're going to hear from Dr. Robbie HOB-LEE. Dr. HOB-LEE received his PhD in chemical engineering at the end of 2019 with an emphasis in biological and thermochemical conversion processes of various biomass sources for alternative crude oil production. Dr. HOB-LEE had to overcome several mental health challenges throughout his graduate career, and it was through support networks such as PhDBalance and Cheeky Scientist that Dr. HOB-LEE was able to finish his degree and find a career in industry. His successes have been highlighted both in Nature and in TEDx talks. Dr. HOB-LEE is currently employed by BASF and works as an innovation manager for the Dispersions Resins, paints and adhesives business located in Charlotte, North Carolina. In his free time, Dr. HOB-LEE can be found on the lake, at the ice rink, or improv comedy club, or flying his drone. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. HOB-LEE to tell us a little bit more about how he found the balance in his graduate path.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And just, I can't see anybody right now, so can I get a verbal confirmation slides and you can hear me okay?
Can see the slides and can hear you just fine.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the National Postdoc Association for having me. As Anna shared, I have a lot of different titles, but I'm really privileged today to be representing PhDBalance during NPAW. So really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you about finding the balance. Let's see, there we go. So one of the really cool things that they do here at with PhDBalance when we announce where we're from is kind of where the native lands are from where we're calling in from. And so for me, I'm calling in, as Anna mentioned, from Charlotte, North Carolina, which was native lands to the Catawba Indian tribe located in North and South Carolina. And in fact, they're kind of a major staple here within the Carolinas in that the major river that flows through is called the Catawba River. And in fact, one of the staples of Charlotte, if you ever visit the area, is the Charlotte Whitewater Center, where the U.S. whitewater rafting team practices. And then there's all kinds of other great outdoor activities that take place at the Whitewater Center. So just a little bit of background from where I'm from. The other thing that Dr. Milgram really mentioned in her introduction that I think is really important is recognizing our imbalance signs. And this is something I really struggled with when I was going through graduate school, is kind of recognizing both my behavior, physical and mental and emotional triggers, so to speak, to know that there was an imbalance kind of coming in place. And I think oftentimes within academia, as well as with research, we think this just kind of comes with the culture, kind of comes with the environment that we're in. And so I really kind of wanted to point out some of my imbalance signs and kind of challenge you or recommend to you or suggest kind of going through the same practice of what are things that you notice that we're going through that you have, that there might be an imbalance right now in work life or as well as your emotional state. You know, tending to oversleep or not have a good time management schedule, having that loneliness feeling that Dr. Tai had mentioned from being an immigrant in a new country, as well as sometimes we have imposter syndrome, even though we are some of the world's leading scientists. In fact, we are in this organization with what we do with our science and our day-to-day life. We still can have that fear of that we're not enough, or we're not meeting some purposes and things of that nature. So always a good exercise to first recognize that these are imbalances and that they need to be balanced and kind of fixed to whatever personal needs that you have. So with that, one of the things that I do to draw balance is trying to figure out, why did I pursue this advanced and so complex degree? Why did I kind of go on this journey? And the movie, The Greatest Showman, came out when I was in graduate school working on my dissertation, and was really moved by it. So I'm curious if in the chat, put me in the chat if you've ever seen The Greatest Showman and it moved you to tears just as probably as much as I have. But when I was looking at why did I decide to go into science? What really kind of sparked me? I realized that I had a dream of a sustainable future. I really wanted to know, how could we make chemistry and fuel and energy more sustainable instead of relying on finite resources? And growing up in the Midwest, we had several different biomass sources. And that was where, within the first semester of my undergraduate career, I was signed up and working in the laboratory, characterizing different crude oils that we were making from thermochemical processes, whether that was corn or wood chips, as well as collaborating with biologists and figuring out how we could ferment these sugars into different products and things. And so that was where I kind of noticed, okay, this is where my core is. This is where my center point is. What other things can I use to find imbalance besides just science? Because I think oftentimes we have kind of these blinders or tunnel vision in that this is my purpose, this is where my core is. But as Dr. Tai mentioned, you have a work-life balance. So where do you find that balance? And then this is kind of another PhD balance exercise that was taught to me when I was going through graduate school and using some of the tools and resources that PhD Balance offered was, okay, where are kind of three core areas that you have? And I mentioned my drive for sustainable chemistry and trying to find green chemistry solutions to modern day commodity chemicals. The other thing I'm really passionate about is STEM advocacy. And that's why I became a speaker for PhD Balance. And I'm thrilled to be here to speak to other scientists such as yourself trying to find balance. There's other organizations that Anna mentioned in my introduction. Cheeky Scientist is one that I'll mention probably throughout my conversation with you. They were really ones that laid out the template for how to find an industry position and how to craft an industry resume. And I'm curious too, if anybody on the call has heard of Cheeky Scientist before, and Isaiah Henkel, please put Cheeky in the chat. I'm really curious to see how many people have heard of Cheeky Scientist. And then secondly, I really enjoy mentoring and coaching. I'm the son, nephew, grandson of many teachers and educators in my family. And it's really interesting to me, I got my start in science from playing with Legos and Kinects growing up, but I was really curious what's younger generations have for them to introduce them to science. And somebody pointed me into this direction of what's called Letters to Pre-Scientist, and where you're a pen pal system throughout the school year, working with middle school students. And so when I'm not doing chemistry or doing green chemical work for my employer, I oftentimes find myself writing letters to pen pals or trying to figure out how I can be a better STEM advocate. And then lastly, of course, you have to have your hobbies. And as Anna mentioned in my introduction, I play hockey. I didn't have a hockey picture here, but that explains the wrist brace. If anybody was wondering, is a hockey injury that I'm recovering from over the weekend. But anywhere you can find anything outdoors, sports related, or anything on the water is where you'll kind of find me. So the other really important piece I want to mention in my graduate research is I didn't have a lot of success, I would say, within the laboratory. This is why I wasn't really pursuing a postdoc situation, in that I didn't have a lot of publications, very little national lab collaborations, and I just really felt very stuck within my graduate research and no really way to figure out what way to kind of find the next step. Within that, and maybe some of you can really relate to this, I felt trapped within the academic system. When I was reaching out to other people within the academic system about how I was going to graduate or what I needed to do to complete my dissertation, I often ran into roadblocks with my own research advisor or even the associate dean saying, you're getting too distracted by these extracurricular activities that are giving you balance, that you need to focus on your research and focus on your dissertation. And so when I realized that I wasn't really finding balance within the academic system, that's when I started to reach out to these other organizations and trying to find those support networks. And I would agree with Dr. Tai, oftentimes we can find ourselves very honed in on our research and everything, But if you're finding an imbalance, one of the first things I would recommend is reaching out to that support network, whether it's counseling and psychological services, other communities within of PhDs, such as NPA, as well as the other two that I was a part of, Cheeky Scientist and PhDBalance. And it was interesting too, I'll share, when I was kind of going through those mental health crises, I was really given an ultimatum. Do I continue my graduate work at the institution I was at, or do I start all over again? And I was ABD, all but dissertation. All I had left was writing. And I was really strongly considering leaving the institution and starting my PhD all over again. And that's where my support network came in, that I called Team Turbo, was a nickname I was given when I was growing up. And they said, we'll stick with you and we'll stick by your side to finish out your graduation career. But please don't restart and everything like that. So really accredit my success to kind of the team behind me that was supporting me and helping me find that balance. And then what was really rewarding is around the same time, Nature was indicating ways to this mental health crisis around academics and graduate researchers. And I shared my story with a freelance writer with Nature, and it just so happened to be published about this national, pandemic of mental health that was going through graduate degrees. And he was able to share my story on Nature and be published, and then was even invited to give a TEDx talk on this crisis. And then I was really fortunate too, when I started sharing the story and kind of the problem that was going on, Cheeky Scientist invited me just last week to Orlando to give a presentation on what is the power of a PhD and how can you market yourself with that PhD within industry. And so I'll wrap up here kind of telling you some of the things, the rejections that I faced when I was trying to transition into industry, and kind of give you some keys to success to kind of find that transition. And typically, yes, you're kind of working with a job market that also sees your skills as very honed, but there's also a lot of transferable skills that you pick up during your graduate career that make you very, very valuable and desirable within industry, in that you have advanced critical thinking skills, you can solve problems that very few people in the world are able to do. And then also too, can be decisive about what needs to be, what's the correct course of action. Oftentimes people can get stuck in the weeds and they don't really know what the progressive next step should be. And with all the design of experiments that we do, we kind of always know what the progressive next step is. And so again, I would recommend, I pulled a lot of this information from Cheeky Scientists and from across the web, and they give a very great outline on how to do this. But one of the key things that they always say is your net worth is your network. And so it's not really much about your performance, but it's more about the exposure and image of what you do. And so that's where I'd really like to end with today, is kind of ask, what is the image that you're projecting, either on social media, professional websites like LinkedIn. You already have an outstanding performance. You're already an expert in a field. It's just now, how do you connect with the right people, and how can you get your name out there to find that broader community? And so with that, that's kind of my ending slide. I've put a few other links in there. Story Collider is another great place to share for podcasts of stories, as well as Cheeky Scientist and PhDBalance. So thank you again, NPA, for inviting me, and happy to stick around for the panel and answer questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hobble-LEE. I think we're hearing a lot about a theme here in finding balance. And what I'm hearing so far is the importance on community and seeking support from your community. Like you referenced, you found that in organizations like PhDBalance and Cheeky Scientist, which it seems like a lot of, I don't know if you were able to see the chat, but a lot of people are familiar with. And I know that sort of coincides with what Dr. Tai was mentioning as well, about turning to your support network and having open communication. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story. And for those of you who might have specific questions for Dr. Hobble-LEE, please feel free to enter those into the chat now if you'd like, or wait until the end of our presentations and we can begin the Q&A at that time. All right, so last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Inga Hansen. Dr. Hansen is a clinical psychologist and a certified integral coach who works with clients in her private practice to help them flourish as the fullest and most authentic versions of themselves. Dr. Hansen has worked at Stanford University since 2008, where she serves as the Director of Wellbeing and the co-founder and director of the Wyland Health Initiative, which is dedicated to promoting mental health and wellness across all genders and sexualities. In 2019, she was the integral winner of the Christine Griffith Award for Student Wellbeing. Dr. Hansen has developed several new academic courses in the realm of gender and sexualities, including Challenging Sex and Gender Dichotomies in Medicine, Human Sexual Diversity in Health, and Transgender Studies. She is a popular speaker and consultant on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Dr. Hansen co-authored the book, The Ethical Sellout, which addresses the ways in which we all face situations that test our values and ideals, and offers new ways to think about marginalization, privilege, and self-interest. The Ethical Sellout won the IPPY Award in 2020. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Hansen to tell us a little bit more about her recommendations and experiences in finding balance.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and be part of this conversation and really appreciating the insights of the previous two speakers. So before we move forward, also wanted to acknowledge I'm in the Bay Area, which is the ancestral and unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribes. And if you're interested in learning more, same link as Robbie had around kind of finding where you are, but then also the movement around land back, how do we return some of the land to Indigenous peoples and just learn more ourselves about the history of land. So for myself, I'm just kind of going to do like 8-minute version of my life story. And so starting with growing up queer in the 80s and 90s, in boarding school. So I have a bunch of pictures to share with all of you. So this is me as a teenager. I was raised in Bloomington, Indiana, which is kind of a Midwestern college town, and sent myself to boarding school at age 16. And so that's why you see all these like kilts and uniforms and that kind of stuff. That experience was a pretty significant awakening for me in terms of class issues, kind of being at a place like that. And also it was where I had my first girlfriend, which, by the way, not received super well in a conservative boarding school in Indiana in the 80s. And then a huge difference from there to moving on to college, which was a women's college in the East Coast, which was just a whole education in feminism and queer activism. And so coming to college and just entering a completely different environment like that, which was open and accepting, it didn't just change my outness in terms of my identity, but just my actual sense of myself, who I am, whether it's okay. And also was maybe some of the first experiences of what it means to be an activist or an advocate and for other communities, and including my own and so on. And a lot of that really extended for me into graduate school and beyond. After that, I went on to do graduate school in clinical psychology. I did a postdoc at the LGBTQ Center in San Diego, which is more of a clinical than a research kind of postdoc experience. Ended up working there for a bunch of years, and then complete change, went up to the Bay Area and worked as a prison psychologist for several years, and then eventually landed at Stanford. And it was a very strange interview, kind of trying to make the case for how the working in a prison prepared me well for Stanford. I was kind of like, well, you're working with people who are going to be with you for a certain number of time. You hope that they come out better than they went in, and so on. I'm now juggling kind of single parenthood, working at Stanford, private practice in psychology. So part of what I wanted to focus on is just how all these experiences from high school and beyond got me interested in some of the dilemmas that we face throughout our personal and professional lives, particularly if we're straddling multiple identities and communities. So how do our identities and values impact like how we navigate life and career? And the reason I have impossible choice here is like, what do you do when something you deeply want comes at the cost of a thing you couldn't bear to part with? For instance, when we're put in positions where we're choosing between career advancement and pride, or authenticity and stability. So I'm calling that an impossible choice simply because it can feel excruciating sometimes when we're put in a position to choose. And these kinds of choices happen for all of us, but they can happen in some particular ways if you're a member of a minoritized community. So if you're queer or trans, if you're BIPOC, first gen, international, living with a disability, and so on. So I got interested in just, how much are we willing to compromise? And what do we do when we're in those situations? So I'm just wanting to name a few of those situations that have come up for me just as themes. I think the concepts will be familiar to you, but just kind of naming them because we don't always think of these things in terms of well-being or finding balance and so on. And also sometimes when we're in these situations, we find ourselves more isolated or don't talk about it as much. So one of the first ones for me that I wanted to name is respectability politics. So this idea that there's an expectation that we present as non-threatening to others in the mainstream, particularly, again, if you hold a minoritized identity. So you're respectable because you are perceived or read as one of them. So for me, one of the things that I've thought about a lot is as a kind of a more of a, I can be frequently read as straight, so straight passing, non-threatening, quote unquote, queer person. Like, how has this opened doors for me that it may not have, and not for others who are maybe less gender normative or who are seen as more of a threat in terms of some of our societal norms and expectations. And also naming the way that even kind of the concept of professionalism can be used or weaponized. We certainly have heard about kind of like the idea of hair, like how natural hair can be seen as non-professional in the Black community. So do you straighten your hair to present or kind of to protect your career? Do you present as a more binary gender and so on? And kind of like, what are some of the compromises we're willing to make or that we're not willing to make based on this political landscape? And also the idea of code switching, which probably you're all familiar, or most of you are familiar with that concept, right? It's this idea like, if you are talking one way with your fellow researchers or postdocs, like another way with your advisor, maybe another way with family, another way with friends, that's switching codes, right? It's kind of shifting your way of being and presenting yourself based on your audience and your environment, which is a useful ability, right? Because it lets you connect with people across identities, disciplines, et cetera. And it also has kind of a tough side to it, right? Because it can be exhausting. It can feel inauthentic sometimes, like kind of like gets us harder to understand, like, okay, is there a real me in here? Are these all the real me? And so on. And how much of your real self do you let show up at work? So for myself, what I've noticed is, there's code switching in the sense, and again, with queer identity in the sense of being out or not, and I'm out in basically every situation, but I notice how often I maybe shift my way of communicating or way of being to help other people feel comfortable, and it's not always a conscious process. So something that I notice can impact my own well-being is the extent to which I'm doing that and how hard I am on myself or how accepting I am around the choices I make around how I communicate and how much I kind of push other people's comfort levels versus accommodate in order to help other people feel comfortable, including around my identity and the identity of communities around me. And another part that I think that can come up, that certainly has come up for me, is around as you progress in your career and your research and so on, how that connects or doesn't connect with your own family background, right? There can be a sense of being pulled in different directions. So what if getting ahead comes with a sense of losing your roots, your family? And I think particularly if you're first gen, and low income, how that can feel like a tougher dilemma, right? Like that your family might be proud, but they might also not understand your experience, or it's harder to talk with them about what it's like maybe starting in college or grad school, and then certainly going on into postdoc experiences. For myself, I'm not first gen, but I'm the most educated woman in my family. And so just kind of noticing how my mom was, I think, began to feel more ambivalent toward my career track as soon as I had kind of surpassed her in terms of education. And even for those of us who maybe are on similar tracks as our own family, how there can be feelings around it. Like even if your family holds doctorates, there can be a comparison. If your path is more or less prestigious than theirs, or there's certain things you choose that are different from what they did, and so on. So just how we handle and hold all of that in our lives. So one of my friends and colleagues at Stanford, we were having a conversation and noticing that a lot of those experiences were kind of shared dilemmas. And so that's why we decided to write a book about it. So this book is just really about the compromises that we all make compromises in some ways, but then we can also end up feeling very alone in that process. And so it just tells the stories of a lot of people who have been in these situations and faced these choices, how they navigated it and what happened next. So for me, the process of writing the book actually was really clarifying. And I started to understand some of my own values and life choices better. And for example, I've decided to leave my position at Stanford, which will happen in a few weeks. And I'm going to be doing that. Well, first I should say it can feel like a strange choice because I'm giving up a lot of security. I'm giving up this connection with this elite institution and so on. But at the same time, really wanted to slow down and have more time to enjoy life and parenthood. And so in a sense, find my own balance. Connected with all these challenges, there's a few kind of life lessons I just wanted to share. I know we'll be talking more about some of these when we have the Q&A and discussion. But I love the intro, just kind of talking about imbalance and balance together. We're not always going to be in balance, and maybe that's not even the goal. Somebody had said to me before that even kind of walking is a process of falling and catching ourselves. So we're kind of in this flux of imbalance and balance every day. And along the lines of some of these dilemmas or difficult choices, that sometimes we actually have to consciously create imbalance in our environments or in ourselves in order to get to a place that there's more comfort and openness and flexibility. So for me personally, here were a few things that were helpful. One was when I was earlier in my career, I felt a lot of anxiety about how often I would screw something up or make a mistake. And yet they weren't really avoidable mistakes, but I would kind of tell myself, oh, why did you screw this up? And get anxious about it. And so I just started telling myself, I'm going to make a mistake every day. And after I did that, there was actually kind of a relief in the sense that when I then did make some mistake that day, I would be like, oh, there it is. There's my mistake for the day, rather than kind of being surprised it's happening again, or kind of beating myself up for once again being in a situation where there was some problem or something that I regretted doing at work. Secondly, this idea that if you don't give your body a break, it will take one, often at an inconvenient time. So that has helped me to stay ahead of these things where as much as I can, and just kind of take breaks, build them in, kind of like that advice about staying ahead of the pain is kind of like staying ahead of the burnout, which can seem impossible at times when our schedules are really overloaded, but still kind of this idea of even building in small breaks and rests and utilizing active rest, which I think we'll talk more about soon. And how powerful that can be. And then finally, this is something that comes up for me, but also in my private practice and with students and grad students talk about all the time, kind of like the anxiety about the thing versus the anxiety about the anxiety. And what I mean is that sometimes our anxiety or sense of stress can be really overwhelming. And it can feel so much like it's about the situation. It can feel about like anything from a mistake we made to our schedule to an interaction with a person, or about whether some project or research we're working on will work out okay. And we often have very little control about that actual situation or the thing. But often a large part of our anxiety is actually judging our own reaction, meaning I'm anxious about my anxiety, I'm stressed about my stress, like that we can work ourselves up judging our own emotional process. And that's the part where we do have a choice, right? We can actually be really kind with ourselves and really compassionate around the fact that the situations that we're in do create anxiety, and that we're naturally going to have anxiety and stress and challenges along the way, and that giving ourselves a break and offering ourselves that kindness can actually go a pretty long way to reducing our overall burnout and stress and challenges along the way. So that's it for my piece, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that about your experiences. And I also love the lessons that you highlighted at the end. I think, this showed up in the chat, but also I just want to call out, I love that idea of saying, I'm going to make a mistake every day. Because I think it comes back to what Dr. Milgram was talking about around allowing grace for ourselves and allowing compassion for ourselves. And so if we enter into a day, a situation with the acceptance and acknowledgement, I'm going to make a mistake today, then maybe that can help facilitate a little bit more self-compassion and grace, which, to bring it back to the theme, can help us facilitate some balance. So thank you all, to all of our panelists for sharing each of your incredible stories. I'm going to, at this point, open it up for questions from the audience. If anybody on the call at this point has a question they'd like to ask broadly to all of the panelists or to an individual panelist, please feel free to enter that into the chat. I'm keeping an eye on that, but while we're giving folks the opportunity to think through and maybe type out their question. Oh, wow. Okay, somebody was on the ball and had typed out their question earlier. So I'll read this. This is for all of the presenters or anyone who wants to chime in. The question is, speaking as someone on the autistic spectrum, I still have challenges with working on more than just my experimental work. Anything involving initiating a connection with others at a professional level is still difficult for me. And sometimes time self-management to an extent. Made some progress ever since coming to the NIH for postdoc, but still working to push myself to get out of my box more readily. The question is, how can you make any suggestions for how to approach these work-life balances, these work-life balance issues through the lens of neurodiversity? And so I'll open that up to any of the panelists who might want to respond to that.
Inga, I saw you nodding. Otherwise, I have a response. I don't want to talk over anybody.
Oh, Robbie, I'd love for you to go first, and I'll follow up after you.
Yeah. No, sounds good. And I appreciate the question. My mom actually teaches with special needs people and people of neurodiversity, and I find it fascinating. She has the best stories at Thanksgiving, hands down. And for me, within BASF too, I've just become more knowledgeable in this area. We have an employee resource group that recognizes these, they call them, invisible disabilities that people don't often see. And how do you find success and overcome that? And unfortunately, that's why I was hoping, Inga, I was going to pass it. I don't have a specific example, but the one thing I find was when I face those challenges is find success. And like the first person I thought of when I saw the question was Elon Musk. Elon Musk is somebody that says, they've got, the same thing of neurodiversity, and it's just finding that success and kind of finding that mentor. And I know it's probably going to be hard to get on Elon Musk's calendar, but I found when I was nervous too, I would consider myself an introvert. And when I had to, expand my network and find this industry community and network with people. That was really, really intimidating. But once you find that right connection in that community, it's amazing how much more you'll come out of your shell when you're in the right fit or within that right community. And so that's what I would reach out to. I would, like I said, we have a resource group that I found within my employer. And I'd be curious, it sounds like a lot of other people in the chat have that same, really seconded that question. So I'd recommend, finding that community to kind of find your voice and kind of become a little bit more extroverted. So Inga, I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Well, definitely. Yeah, I really appreciate the question first off. And I feel like it's a relevant question for so many people. And really want to second what Robbie was saying around finding community. And I see a suggestion here in the chat around neurodiversity teas, which sounds fantastic. We have a couple of folks on our own team who identify as neurodiverse, and I feel like one of the, and I know not every postdoc environment is equally flexible and welcoming of different ways of being and neurodiversity, but I do feel like if you feel like it's an environment that you have that kind of base sense of safety, kind of sharing with your team or folks around you some of the ways that the environment can be supportive to help you process and help, and kind of like some of the things, if there's things that can actually be accommodated to you or shifted to allow you to work your best and be your most authentic self. Sometimes it's like fairly small changes. Like on our team, for instance, when we were having meetings and discussion, we would often listen or watch something and have a discussion afterwards, but it turned out some of our team members really did better with having the link in advance because they just need more processing time. And then also recognizing that some people communicate better verbally, more comfortably, and other people communicated better in writing. And so it was just some small things around kind of allowing there to be different ways of communicating and processing that actually I think has really increased the comfort level of folks on the team. And then also, at least for some of the folks that I'm working with, it's been helpful to just kind of recognize that if you do need some more time to process things or even figure out how you want to manage a social interaction, to be generous with yourself around what you need, meaning that whether or not the environment is friendly, that you might need to, in advance of a meeting, in advance of a social interaction, in advance of some of these areas of research, to kind of figure out that you might be more comfortable figuring out your phrasing or your questions or so on, just so that in the moment you're not kind of feeling as overwhelmed or overstimulated having some of those interactions. Sometimes that can increase comfort level.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you for your perspectives on that. And I think, some of what I'm hearing is reflective of what showed up in the talks today too, that trying to find community and the suggestion in the chat about joining the neurodiversity teas sounds fantastic. It looks like you can reach out to Dr. Milgram for anybody who might be interested in that. And then also, as we heard in the presentations earlier, thinking about ways you can communicate and advocate for some specific changes that might be useful. So thanks everybody for your perspectives on that. Okay, next question. How does a final year PhD scholar successfully find a postdoc position where the research that they would conduct can actually be decided by themselves? And what if the PhD scholar has a blue sky research idea and there's no existing postdoc position to fill an innovative research idea like this? Any suggestions or input on that question from any of the panelists?
I think I can share my experience, how I able to find my postdoc position. So I think there's like a few ways for you to get a postdoc. Like for my case, I actually look for the position through LinkedIn, science area. So I try to look for some openings that suit me. For example, previously I was doing, I'm more like a molecular biologist. So I try to look for like positions that they require some skills like that. And also it's a field that I'm interested in. So this is one way. If you don't have any specific research topic that you want to do, but for me, I limit myself to I like to understand the disease developing mechanism. So that's why when I look for jobs, I look for something similar. And the second way is that you actually can approach certain PI. So let's say from your previous lab or when you attended some conference, you might encounter some professor that you are interested in his or her project. So you can always shoot an email to him, her, and ask for, is there any opening in their lab? And the third one, I think someone mentioned in the chat as well, you can look for fellowship. So basically you write your own proposal, and if you're lucky, then you can get the fellowship and you get to do the research that you want.
Great, thank you so much for that input, and thank you for also referencing the suggestion in the chat about looking at national lab fellowships. And then I think, Robbie, you had something else you wanted to mention about that?
Yeah, no, I will just to add on the other place you could reach out to if it's a blue sky idea. Venture capitalists and industry love hearing new ideas all the time. So I would say if you have a blue sky idea, the fellowships and finding the postdoc is one. I know for me, for my connection, when I was working on my algae research, I was training at a gym with a business student, and he was like, wait a minute, the algae you make have tissue engineering, fertilizer, and catalytic applications. He's like, those are so many different markets. And we were just honed in on, tissue engineering. And we had a very blinders kind of mindset. So I would say be open with your idea and share it out there. You'd be surprised at how many business people would pick it up. If you're having difficulties in the national lab space, as well as, postdoc fellowships, there's venture capitalists out there that would love funding blue sky ideas. So, and love to hear them.
Excellent point. Yes, thank you for mentioning that, blue sky ideas are not something to shy away from. Those are things that people are looking for and can be rewarded in community. So hopefully that helps give some direction for this particular question. So the next question for the panelists relates to coming back to finding the balance, and specifically finding work-life balance between having a young child and pursuing one's career. This person writes in the chat, as a new mom and postdoc, I felt the desire and ambition for career and success has reduced after having a child. I wonder if any of the panelists have had similar experience and how they navigated that. So any perspectives to share in response to that? Yes, please feel free, Dr. Hansen.
Thank you. And also just wanted to appreciate that there's already a response in the chat, and just, I really want to encourage everyone here, if there's questions in the chat that you feel like you have personal experience with, it is great to just have the dialogue in there also. So thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so I'm a mom, and a few of the things that I can highlight is that what you mentioned is really relatable, just like how everything was completely thrown by having a baby and young child. And that one of the things that I think makes it harder is how often we approach things with this kind of scarcity mindset, as though everything has to happen right now, and that we should kind of always be on and always on track, and that our path should be linear. And that it's just so often not the case, right? And there's so many things that can shift our priorities or cause us to step back in some ways and so on. I really like the feedback around just kind of like having trust that over time things can rebalance. As your kid gets older, they become more self-sufficient. And also you will likely continue to grow in a way that parenting becomes more integrated into your overall identity. Right now, because it's new, of course, this kind of taking over and it takes more energy. And just kind of trusting the process that over time there will be a new integration and balance. And if not, that like for some of us, our priorities have shifted and they continue to shift. And that might be okay too, right? And so listening to ourselves along the way, and that the dreams and plans we originally had for ourselves a few years ago might not always be the ones that ultimately work the best for us. So kind of that flexibility along the way with having that trust in enoughness over time that we'll get to where we need to be and we'll have enough resources down the road.
Yeah, thank you to the person in the chat who shared their experience, and Dr. Hansen also for sharing yours and pulling out some of the important pieces of those experiences, like, you know, sort of trusting that things might improve over the course of time. I also appreciate what the person in the chat said around, you know, finding maybe smaller ways to engage with science that could help increase motivation potentially, with the acknowledgement, as Dr. Hansen mentioned, that maybe sometimes things are going to shift and that might just be okay for a period of time, or, you know, definitely. But excellent question. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Before we move on, I don't want to move on too quickly. I want to give other folks in the panel a chance to respond if they want to. But then we have some other great questions about finding balance to move on to, if not. Good to move on. Okay, great. So the next question related to finding balance is, could the panelists share some advice for introverts on finding the balance between making connections / conversations without being completely energy drained, especially given that what we've talked about a lot today is finding, you know, leaning into community, communicating with the people in your life. So this is a great question, and I'll pass it over to the panelists, whoever might like to jump in first.
I'll jump. Okay. No, one of the things I'll say is, as researchers and scientists, I'd say one of our expertise is asking questions, and we probably have a profound higher sense of curiosity than the normal person. And so I found when I was going and networking and trying to find where I was going to fit in industry, they have a term called informational interviews, and it was just asking questions like, what is your day job, what do you do, kind of things. And I've noticed that I was able to build rapport with people in that I showed an interest in what they do and in just a general curiosity, as opposed to kind of sometimes the mind-numbing, you know, what's the weather gonna look like today, you know, small talk conversations, and that we can get to the meat of the conversation a lot faster. And by asking, you know, inquisitive questions, either because we've done our research ahead of time or things of that nature. But I found that I can take a step back and be the introvert and let the person talk if I just ask questions. The other thing that's really helpful is if you connect with an extrovert, firstly, such as myself, who can just talk your ear off, it's a lot easier if you just let the other person do all the talking and you just keep asking questions. And as soon as you meet those people, then you kind of try to feed off their energy. But I would say rely on your skills as a researcher and as a scientist to ask inquisitive questions and get them to think, and you'll be amazed at how much rapport you'll build with them.
Yeah, I think I can share some advice as well. So, I mean, I think there's a few introverts like asking similar questions. So I think for a person who don't really comfortable in like making conversation, you can start small first. Like to me, when I first moved here, I don't have a lot of friends. So I start small by making friends in my lab. So just start from talking with my lab members first, some just, you know, daily conversation, even 1 or 2 sentences are fine. And for the conference and meeting, if you feel uncomfortable to ask questions, you know, during their talk, you can always find them during the lunch session or during the break session and talk with them personally, or even during the poster session. I think it would be really helpful, and you can, you know, it will allow you to have more time to communicate with them.
Great, thank you for those suggestions. Those are really helpful practical tips that I think people could walk away with and put into practice today if they need to. One small thing that I'll maybe add on to that is, you know, giving yourself permission to take a break. If things start to feel like too much or overwhelming at a conference or as you're trying to build community, you know, this does not all have to be done at once. And so giving yourself the opportunity to say, like, I've kind of reached my threshold here, so I'm not going to push myself past that. might be another thing to just keep in mind.
Oh, no, definitely, Anna. I definitely take the networking sessions of conferences to go back to my hotel room and take a nap. The introvert in me is like, this is my time to recharge. I do my networking, like Dr. Tai said at the poster sessions or something. Networking time equals nap time at conferences for me to recharge. Yes.
Perfect. Yes, you heard it here first. Napping is the new networking. But giving yourself a break and permission to take what you need or give yourself what you need, I think is critical, and finding balance, be it with networking and communication or any of the other topics that we've heard about today. Okay, so you guys, these questions are wonderful. Please keep them coming through. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of conversation also happening in the chat of a lot of people sharing their experiences. So a lot of really wonderful, what I'm thinking of as pretty validating, conversation happening here. So please keep that going. So to that end, another great question. Has or does anyone struggle with feeling guilty for not working hard enough? This person references trying to find a focus on having balance in their life, but then feeling like they're not doing the postdoc duty because they're not willing to work 60 hours a week, and how to kind of navigate that. Excellent question. So if anybody in the chat can relate, please feel free to include that. And then any of our panelists, if that's something that you yourself have experienced or have suggestions for navigating, that would be great to hear.
Yeah, like for me, definitely, I always feel guilty for not working hard enough. Because, for example, when I was doing my PhD, even though I work for 12 hours per day, I'm not the most hardworking person in the lab. Many people like stay much longer than me. And also, even now, I'm doing postdoc now, and I still always see my other friends who are like, they are also postdoc as well. They always say, oh, recently I published a paper in Science, in Nature. And then I was like, wow, how can you guys publish so many papers in such a short time? So I always feel like I'm really stressed. Am I not working hard enough? Am I not smart enough? So I think it's really common. And I always feel defeated because of this. But after that, I was like, it's okay. I try not to compare with other people. So I try my best. I know that I already work hard enough. So sometimes things doesn't work out, and it's not my fault. So that's why I say I love my research, but I don't want like work is the only thing in my life. So I try not to think too much, try not to compare too much, and just enjoy my life. So work-life balance.
And I just first off, Yentang, everything that you just said, I really resonate with. And I feel like even just posting these questions in the chat, right? Like the experience of feeling less alone and that struggle, it goes a long way. And just paying attention to whose voices are in your head, right? Many of these institutions, many places where you're doing a postdoc, there can be a culture that can end up feeling kind of like a toxic work culture. And so being conscious of that what the norm might feel like around you isn't necessarily a healthy norm. And balancing that with other voices, like either like finding other people who like this are also dedicated to like setting boundaries and maintaining their own well-being, even if it feels strange in their environment. And then another resource I'll mention is just Kristen Neff and self-compassion. So she has a couple books on this, and the whole website, selfcompassion.org. There's a lot of stuff in there that takes like 5 or 10 minutes to read, or short exercises that can really just kind of help rebalance. And whether it's around, are you working enough, or so many of the topics that were raised today, I think that can be a good way of being kind to yourself in the midst of all these pressures. Thanks, Anna.
Anna, and you read my mind too. I was just going to ask Inga to put that in the chat because I want to reference that too. But no, to echo what the other panelists have said, as soon as I read that question, it reminded me of a time when I was wrapping up graduate school, and I literally had to call my mother for permission to eat because I had a stack of papers to grade so high, and like that was one of the things I noticed as my triggers is my eating habits. in that it was like I wasn't giving myself permission to take care of myself because I thought I had to meet the needs of others. And similarly, if you remember during my talk, I had some administrative uphill battles with my advisor where you looked at my appointment and it was only 10% research and like that and 40% TA, and then that other 50% was supposed to be student. And like my advisor admitted to like taking advantage of that, 50% student so they could advance their research. And it became a whole battle. Like we got student affairs and HR involved. But I mean, if you have to start setting boundaries, I mean, there are laws in place that basically say you are only allowed to work such and such an hours. And I would recommend that was who I've had the most success with, was the institution HR as well as student affairs, to kind of put those boundaries in to say, this is as far as you're going to go. And then my last note, I'd say on self-compassion, one of the things I learned when I was getting, psychology and counseling training, and still am to this day, was, I'm a people pleaser. I get energized by helping others. And, somebody mentioned to me, they said, if you were a lifeguard, would you rather have somebody like Zac Efron or The Rock come out and rescue you as a lifeguard, or would you have somebody like Will Ferrell? And it's like, well, yeah, you'd probably want like Zac Efron or The Rock to save you. And it's like, well, that's because they take good care of their body. So before you go and rescue somebody else as a lifeguard, make sure you're taking care of yourself and you're in a good foundation before you go and try to, do the work of others. So I use that to this day of like, okay, I've got to be like the Zac Efron or The Rock when it comes to mental health before I try to come and give advice.
Love that comparison and that perspective. I think, sort of first of all, thank you to the person who put this question in the chat, because it has really hit home for a lot of people, all of our panelists, a lot of people in the chat, and a lot of postdocs who maybe even, aren't saying, oh yes, me too. Have experienced things like that before. We see a note here from Tom that they hear this a lot at the NPA. And so one of the things that I also want to call out is the recommendation to watch or participate in the Building a Resilient Scientist series. That is an incredible series that focuses a lot on this question and also offers a sense of community for others who might be feeling similarly. And I'll just in that piece, I guess, by saying what Dr. Milgram mentioned at the beginning of our panel today, and that is, in order to do well, we have to be well. And so, coming back to that question of balance, somebody mentioned this in the chat, it might feel a little odd, but it is important for us to be able to we have to take care of ourselves before we are able to really do the work that we want to set out, be that postdoc work or other. So excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. Let's see, other questions. A lot of people, that question really resonated with a lot of people, a lot of suggestions, good points mentioned there. I think we have time for maybe one more question before we wrap up today. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So if we have one more question, I'll give that a minute for it to come through in the chat. And then if not, I will ask a question myself. So we'll give that just a second to come through. So I'll go ahead and pose my question. This is something that I think can be more, we can think about a little bit more broadly in the sense of finding balance, but could each one of the panelists share a tip or strategy that has been helpful for you in prioritizing time for yourself, given some of the professional demands that you face? And maybe that gets kind of back to specific strategies for helping to reduce some of that guilt that was mentioned in the previous question.
Should I go first?
Robbie, go ahead.
All right, sweet. No, I really like that question because I just kind of came upon that recently of just maybe when I was kind of going through the mental health challenges and things, I don't know, did some mindfulness and reflection are the kind of the buzzwords, but was a scientist of my emotions. What was bringing me energy? What was bringing me positivity? Just kind of keeping a mental journal of where do I get excited? Where do I find motivation? What do I find encouraging? And it was to the point where like I wrote part of my dissertation at a bar because I just liked the fact that a waiter or a waitress would come up asking, how are you doing? And like, yes, they were looking for a tip, but that was so much uplifting, right? Just to hear somebody, how are you doing? And we talked about finding a community, finding that environment. Same thing when I was teaching or helping others or, my office hours. I always found that I always had a higher, engagement after office hours. And so then it was kind of applying that to, okay, if I'm noticing these upticks in energy and motivation, how do I get more of this in my life? How do I bring this more in to, finding value and finding appreciation? It was interesting. The reason I say recently, I saw a tweet by an athlete recently, and he said, you can get water at a bubbler for free or from a visiting stand for $5, or if you're on an airplane, or at an airport, it will cost like $17. So no matter what you have, you're that water bottle. Go someplace that you can find that you bring value, and going to a place that has your appreciation. I guess it comes back to that community, and you just kind of are a scientist and you try new experiments, try new things and reflect on, how much joy did that bring, how much excitement and motivation, so you can be, very productive in those 40 hours or so that you're going to give to your work. So that would be my piece of advice, is be a scientist to your emotions.
I can go next. Thank you, Robbie. One of the things that I found is like, when we're really busy, we have to be more intentional about our breaks and our rest. And the busier I am, the more I have to plan it, meaning that it's helpful sometimes to actually come up with a list of different ways that I can take a break and offer myself active rest. Because then in the moment, I'm more likely to do it if I don't have to think through, what do I need right now? What are my options? What's accessible to me? And so on, and using the time well. And so like often what I feel like doing is more passive rest, but what is actually more helpful and replenishing is active rest. And what I mean by that is that a 20-minute walk is often more helpful than an hour scrolling my phone. But if left to my own devices, I will spend the hour scrolling my phone, right? And so having a few different things at my disposal that are kind of like really easy to access, so that every hour, every couple hours, I can even just take like a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break, and doing things that are kind of a balance of like more upregulation, like music and dancing and making sounds and all that kind of stuff that sometimes I need in order to come down, versus like things that are purely relaxing, like a meditation or breaths or stretching or going in nature and things like that. And so having that accessible to yourself feels like you're more likely to do it and more likely to do something attuned to what you actually need.
Okay. I think I pretty much cover most of my tips in my talk. So I think the most important thing is find time for yourself. So no matter, like for myself, I stop working after 10, and then I will have some me time every day, like doing things that I like. For example, I will, video call my husband, and then we talk, and then we share things that happen, and some, like about our experiments as well sometimes. And then other than that, I think it's important to, sometimes you just need to have to say no, because my PI, sometimes he always, he has a lot of wild ideas. He has many things for me to do, but then I was like, I don't have that much time for all of this work. So I would just pick those important ones. And also sometimes when your lab mates ask for your helps, I mean, if you can help, definitely yes. But if you are too busy, you are too occupied, just say no. And I think another point is sometimes you have to stay away from toxic people. And some people, they always come into work with their negative emotion, and then they always try to make you sad, or they always talk down to you. So I try not to engage with these people too much, because their negativity will always, affect me. So I would say, make friends who are more, less toxic, I would say. Yeah, that's the things that that's my tips for staying happy during my postdoc.
Wonderful. These are great suggestions. I love. Just to recap, we heard the suggestion of being a scientist of your own emotions. So investigating where are the times when you have more energy to maybe do something for yourself. What is it that's more draining to you? But being really sort of like that curious observer of how things play out for you. Making time to focus on rest and acknowledging that there's different types of rest, that some may be easier to engage in, like scrolling through our phone, but some may be more replenishing, like going for a walk. And so maybe even having like a menu of things to choose from, type it out or have it written out in advance, so you don't have to come up with those ideas on the spot. And then also, a lot of other good suggestions around who we surround ourselves with, the messages that we attend to, not only from ourselves and our internal dialogue, but from others as well. Yin-Ting, you also talked about something that I think is so important, which is like having a bookend to the day, and saying, okay, 10 o'clock, I could do more. I could work till midnight, but 10 o'clock is my cutoff time. And after that point, that's when I'm doing things for myself. And so scheduling that and having that in our day-to-day schedule and routine can be great. So amazing. I think that's an excellent place for us to wrap up our conversation today on those wonderful tips. I just want to extend a final thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much for your time, your insights, your recommendations. I hope everybody on the call today is able to walk away with some new ideas of actions they can put into place to help find balance. Also want to extend a thank you to NPA for putting this event together. Thank you, Tom, Christy, Amy, everyone who participated in organizing this. And of course, thank you to all of the postdocs who are on the call today. You do so much for the research community, and certainly, as has already been mentioned, more than a week's worth of appreciation is warranted. So thank you again so much for all that you do. One last reminder, the NPA is doing a postdoc needs assessment. So if you would, I can put the link to that survey in the chat again, just so it's right here at the end. If you would just go ahead and click on that link and have that pulled up to complete at your own leisure. Again, this is, the NPA is really organized around meeting postdoc needs. And so this is a great way to let them know what it is that you need so they can best meet that. So thank you again to everyone for your time today. And I think we can probably go ahead and wrap up here.